Bloodstained souls. The collector's obsession. Ethan Cross had an obsession, an insatiable hunger for rare and unique shoes. His collection, worth thousands, ranged from vintage sneakers to limited edition designer boots. Every inch of his penthouse was lined with shelves showcasing his prized possessions, each pair meticulously maintained and displayed under glass cases. One evening, Ethan received a mysterious email from an anonymous seller. "I have something you won't find anywhere else. A masterpiece, handcrafted, one of a kind. The price? Only for those who truly understand its worth." Attached was a single photograph, a pair of deep crimson leather boots with black laces and an eerie, almost organic texture. Something about them seemed alive. Intrigued, Ethan replied instantly. The next day, a small, unmarked package arrived at his doorstep. Inside was the pair of boots, wrapped in an old velvet cloth. As soon as he touched them, a strange warmth seeped into his fingers. The leather felt too soft, too supple, as if it had once been part of something living. Ignoring the unease creeping up his spine, he placed them on his display shelf. That night, the nightmares began. Ethan dreamed of a dimly lit cobbler's workshop where a faceless man stitched the shoes with long crimson threads. He could hear faint whispers growing louder with each stitch. A woman's voice sobbed in the background. Then, in the dream, the man turned to him, and though he had no eyes, Ethan felt an unbearable gaze piercing his soul. Ethan woke up gasping. The boots were no longer on the shelf. They were at the foot of his bed. The cursed leather. Determined to uncover the truth, Ethan began researching the origins of the boots. He contacted the seller, but the email no longer existed. Frustrated, he took the boots to an expert in vintage footwear, an old cobbler named Mr. Duval. The moment Mr. Duval saw the boots, his face drained of color. "Where did you get these?" he whispered, refusing to touch them. Ethan explained, but the cobbler shook his head. "These aren't just shoes, boy, they're cursed." According to legend, a notorious cobbler from the 18th century crafted shoes using human skin and blood. He believed that binding the sole of the wearer to the leather would create the perfect fit. Each pair carried the suffering of its victims, and those who wore them unknowingly became beacons for lost souls, entities drawn to pain and despair. Ethan scoffed, but as he left the shop, a chilling wind blew past him, carrying a whisper. "You wear us next." That night, Ethan locked the boots in a glass case, but as he turned off the lights, the whispers returned, louder this time. Shadows twisted unnaturally in the corners of his room. A sudden knock echoed through his penthouse, though the door remained shut. The boots had moved again. And now they were facing him. The last walk. Ethan was losing his mind. He hadn't slept in days, too terrified to close his eyes. The whispers had become constant, sometimes pleading, sometimes shrieking. Dark figures loomed in the corners of his apartment, watching, waiting. Every mirror reflected something that wasn't him. His shadow moved when he stood still. The boots wouldn't leave. No matter what he did, burn them, drown them, bury them, they always returned. Sitting at the foot of his bed, polished, gleaming, waiting for him to give in. That night, something changed. A thick, suffocating fog rolled into his penthouse, seeping through the windows and doors like a living thing. The air smelled of rusted metal and decay. The whispers turned into voices, clear and distinct now. "Wear them. Complete the ritual. You are chosen." His hands trembled as he grabbed his phone, dialing his friend Alex, the only person who might believe him. The call rang once, twice. Then, a voice answered, but it wasn't Alex. "Ethan, you can't run anymore." The line went dead. A sharp knock echoed through the apartment. Then another, and another. The sound came from everywhere. His bedroom door, his closet, even inside the walls. And then the lights flickered. His heart pounded as he turned toward the boots. They had moved again. Now, they were inches from his feet. Ethan backed away, but something unseen forced him forward. His body wasn't his own anymore. His legs trembled as his hands, acting against his will, reached for the boots. The moment his fingers touched the leather, pain exploded through his body. A deep, searing agony that burned through his veins, spreading like wildfire. He screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the shadows. His feet slid into the boots, the leather tightening like a vice. The floor beneath him twisted, warping into something unnatural. The walls stretched and bled, melting into an endless void. A cold skeletal hand gripped his shoulder, and a voice rasped in his ear. "Walk. His body obeyed. Each step dragged him deeper into the abyss. His apartment dissolved into darkness, replaced by the dimly lit workshop from his nightmares. The walls were lined with rows upon rows of human skin stitched together into grotesque tapestries. The air was thick with the scent of iron and old leather. And in the center stood the faceless cobbler. He loomed over an ancient workbench, his skeletal hands threading a blood-soaked needle through a fresh piece of skin. His eyeless face turned toward Ethan, and though he had no mouth, his voice slithered through the air. A new addition to the collection. Ethan tried to move, to run, but the boots forced him forward. His body stiffened, his muscles locked. The pain in his feet intensified as the leather fused into his flesh, his veins turning black like ink spreading through water. The cobbler reached out, his fingers cold as the grave. Ethan's breath hitched as the needle in his other hand plunged into his skin. A fresh scream tore from his throat as his body split apart, unraveling like a threadbare doll. The last thing he saw before everything went black was his reflection in the cobbler's glass. His skin had turned deep crimson. His body was now leather. The boots had found their next soul, and somewhere, in another city, another collector would soon receive a mysterious email. The cycle would begin again.